Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com. Morning guys, and welcome back to another Brew Brain Dump, a short, hopefully somewhere in the region of 10-minute introspection. I share thoughts on creativity. They're a bit more disjointed. I don't make notes for this one. I just have an idea. I have an idea or a thought that I think has some kind of value, some merit, some use to you guys, and I share it around creativity. Quickly, a thank you to the ever-present and founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. They're a fantastic illustration agency. Offices all over the show: London, New York, Sydney, Shanghai, I believe, Paris. Global, truly global illustration and animation and art agency. So take a look at their roster of incredible top-level artists at illustrationx.com. And a little shout out to the Ukrainian Institute, a beautiful organisation supporting the brave and embattled Ukrainian creative community who continue to inspire with their efforts, their work, their resilience, their defiance at this time. You can support them by sharing the work of their incredible artists. Simple as that. You can get them more exposure. Or if you're in a position to, you can commission them. You can support them in even bigger ways. But if nothing else, it's worth having a look just simply to get inspired by the work. ui.org.ua. So let's get to it. I'm talking to you and I'm on quite an existential bent this morning. It's Monday morning, which is ripe for it. Thankfully, there's a blue sky outside my studio, some bird song and something to grasp hold of on a Monday morning, you know, instead of Gotham City and gloom. And I don't even put the radio on now. Sometimes my wife does, and I quite like Scott Mills on Radio 2 here in the UK in the morning. But there's been times where I've lunged for the power socket as soon as the news comes on, because that mainstream news, as we all know, is designed to alarm and anger us in some way. It's a very negative news cycle, and I've certainly been victim to that in recent times. But for some grounding on this, I just wanted to say, regular listeners, thank you for persevering with my continued diarising of the anxiety that I suffered over the last 3 years. Truth be told, it really got heightened after moving to Salisbury in 2022. Very tired all the time. New parent of young twins. The kids were about 1 3/4 when we moved to Salisbury, and I'd had something of a buffer from a big commercial job that put me in a more comfortable position than what I'd known before. And when that buffer started to diminish somewhat, for the first time I felt significantly heightened financial pressure, given that I was now a parent and had to provide. And Salisbury was significantly more expensive than Manchester. So those things combined brought on a new level of, rabbit holes, getting into destructive thought patterns of, oh my God, what if the work stops? My living costs are more. I've got 2 mouths to feed. Couple that with the hottest summer on record, I believe. Something close to, I know we broke temperature records 2022. We've got 40 degrees here in the UK, which is, you'll laugh if you're in Mexico or America or, hotter regions. But for us, we don't know it. Our houses aren't designed to cope with it. And British people are not used to that sort of extreme heat. But for me, on an existential level, it raised the alarm of the climate crisis, something I feel all the time, have been feeling. I'm going to jump back on and record my main podcast this week about my initial portfolio shortly. But in that portfolio, there's no hiding place from the fact that the environmental decline in our world was on my mind in a big way back then. In some ways it was a playful portfolio, but it was a very aggressively It was a portfolio full of activism, my naive younger self form of activism. So you got the environmental thing going on. And then there's this third pillar to the anxiety that I've been feeling last year, which is my own mortality and existential dread, which is something I've felt on and off over the years. You know, I'll do that thing where you wake at 4 a.m. and you just suddenly get that thought, oh, fuck, I'm going to be dead one day. What does that mean? And what? And you get the horrible racing heart, you get the clenched jaw, you get the full fight or flight response, which is horrid. And usually it would pass. You know, I would wake up, sit up, have a glass of water, go to the toilet, calm down, and usually get off back to sleep. I'd be all right. But what's happened as a part of this vulnerable brain and what I believe to be disordered anxiety is it could be any one of those three pillars that would trigger me off into existential thoughts or terror about work drying up, you know, given the economic climate and AI and all the kind of doom porn that we see out there about the end of something. Whatever the thing was that would tip me off, it would open the door for the other things. And then on a fatigued brain, unable to properly manage all this stuff, really an untrained puppy of a brain, as I keep saying, because I got through my life with, I'm not going to say ease, because life isn't easy, full stop. But I've had to, you know, I grew up in a psychologically safe family, like a loving environment. We weren't well off as a family by any stretch, quite the opposite. But we always had. My parents were very frugal. They sacrificed a lot to support me and my brother. They gave us everything we could want. You know, we got the games console at Christmas. You know, I remember getting a full Leeds United Christmas strip, Leeds United strip at Christmas, and you know, we didn't want. And then I benefited from being a generation that had more opportunities in terms of education and travel and all of that stuff. And I had that. I had a wonderful group of friends, predominantly ones that I met when I was in my teens, mid-teens, and really came in with an important role of enabling my true character. These guys were open, honest, hearts on sleeves. We shared breakups together. We were very giving. You know, we took the piss a lot, as lads tend to. But they were there. They enabled me to be my true self, and it was beautiful. So I've always, you know, I got to go to uni. I got to chase after a career as a freelance illustrator, you know. My mum, a very gifted artist, didn't really have the opportunity, you know, a circumstance of being a full-time mum. Occasionally worked part-time here and there, but was absolutely there as a mum, was a rock in my life. And, you know, a real motivator creatively, really gave me that mantra of, you know, you're going to be doing this for a long time. Choose with your heart, follow your dreams, and gave me the freedom to do that. Never any pressure, but all the encouragement when I showed the inclination to follow this creativity thing. And I think because of that, and having this infrastructure around me, university, and then a network of creators and peers and everything else, I haven't had to build too much in the way of resilience. You know, I didn't lose too many people in my life apart from timely losses like grandparents. So really, I kind of got to my late 30s without too many challenges psychologically. So then when you do get challenge, of course, you're kind of made out of putty. And that's what I've found. So I'm still in training, so to speak. I'm now writing a gratitude journal every morning. I'm journaling every evening to process my thoughts, to reflect, to bounce things back at myself, to externalize the storm of thoughts that is in my head and that has been the catalyst for this anxiety. So I'm sure a lot of you listening to this are going to relate to this now, because we are an industry full of, you know, a spectrum of overthinking, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But who hears me on the existential thing? I'd love to hear from you if you do. You know, if you don't want to do that publicly, I'm not really going to share this publicly, to be honest, apart from a little teaser on LinkedIn, maybe a story on Instagram. Drop me an email, though, ben@bentalon.com. Do you get that? Do you wake up in the night with those horrible thoughts of, my God, I'm going to be dead one day and the people I love are going to go that way too? I've really had to reckon with that recently, and journaling has helped. You know, I've had to challenge myself and establish my own internal beliefs, like how do I interpret this world around me? And it's been a very healthy process, but the reason I'm talking about it here is because I'm very interested in how that manifests creatively. Now, I keep mentioning Marcus Aurelius, the former Roman emperor. His Meditations, never intended for publication. That was a book written with the explicit use of helping himself to stay sane at a time of much war, famine, disease, the lot. You know, at that time, kind of on the decline, the Roman Empire. But they're reflections that echo throughout time. They're just as relevant. It could have been written for our time, you know, about using your directing mind, almost stoicism, to to stay on course, to stay strong when things are not strong around you, and to understand, to establish purpose and to know limitations. Also, I was reading in Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic this morning's little mantra. It's a daily, message around stoicism and managing our mind. And it was about the damaging effect of overestimating your capabilities or underestimating them. And it's this idea of being honest and sort of reflection and acknowledging our weaknesses and being at peace with that and what we can't do, and also what we can do, and pushing ourselves where necessary, but with, a fulfilling life that has space in it, that has time to rest and reflect and to nourish and to think about the bigger things. Now, creativity for me has always been a vehicle for that. My fiction books are very much outlets in many ways for me. The stories for the apocalypse stories were a reflection really of that time in 2022 when the environmental stuff really started to grip me in a way that was beginning to really have a negative effect on my day-to-day life. I would stand at the sink washing up and my wife would be like, "Are you all right? You seem quite distant." And I say, "No, not really. It's the environmental thing again. It's really pressing." Now, I'm not going to go into depth with how bad this got, but it did really get quite bad to the point where I tried to have a nap because I just felt washed out and jaded and incapable in my life. But then that would be filled with palpitations and anxiety, and it was a really tough time. And last year, this coupled with the work stuff and the mortality stuff really reached a fever pitch where I had to start doing some serious inner work. I was having, I had about 12 nights, I've said before on this show last year, where I had zero sleep. Had a few at the start of this year. That seems to have improved somewhat as I've done more and more deep work on myself. But what I'm interested in is what manifestations of that kind of thought process do you use? Do you draw around that? Do you paint around that? Maybe you paint surreal images. I used to share a studio in London just down the corridor from Claire Doudney, a wonderful artist in London, and she was painting her dreams, and it was this wonderful kind of series that were introspective but also fantastical. And there was something beautiful about those paintings that invited conversation, and I think that the social side of this is key. Conversations I've had with friends they've surprised me, and they've had the very similar thought processes around mortality and everything, and I think it's something innately human, but is also specifically there for people with a very sensitive mind who feel the joy and the hurt of the world a lot more. So first of all, I guess my question is, what work have you done around helping yourself with those kind of thoughts and your own vulnerabilities? But also, what are the creative outlets of that? That's what I'm interested in. I started to write. I lost my oldest friend a few years ago, and I've started to just sort of jot down to myself writing conversations that I think we would have had he been around today. Now, that sounds macabre, maybe a bit morbid, but it's not. It's extremely cathartic because those conversations were incredibly important. Particularly in my formative years, we would go for these long wanders and, buy an ice lolly from the shop when we were younger and just talk about, romantic woes or, what's the purpose of all this? What am I, where am I going? What am I doing? And it was just so helpful. So I'm sort of writing those to myself, and I'm blessed with a wonderful wife who will talk to me about these things, great friends I can bounce things off, and you guys, the creative community. That's why I'm sort of reaching out to you guys today. I'd like to know how you deal with the bigger concerns in your life, the very, the deep, the stuff we can't know about, the bigger, what's after death and all that stuff. Like, how do you cope with that? How do you manage it? Do you put it in a song? Or if not you, can you give me some good examples of how anyone else has dealt with that? Because it's something I'm interested in as part of my own work, is using that creatively. And not for any major project. I probably won't even share it. Mind you, this is me, so maybe I will. Anyway, it's enough rambles for a Monday morning, but that's the Brew Brain Dump this morning. There you have it. Well and truly dumping on you there. Maybe it's too much for a Monday morning. Sorry if it is. If not, get in touch, ben@bentalon.com. Love to hear from you. And while you're at it, please do leave a little subscription or a rating or a review on the podcast, on whichever platform you get this on. It would mean a lot. Thank you, guys, and please tell a friend. Thanks again to the founding sponsor, illustrationx.com. Check out that global range of illustrators and animators now at illustrationx.com, and do check out the Ukrainian Institute supporting the embattled and brave Ukrainian community during this time of war, ui.org.ua. Right, back soon with my first portfolio breakdown. See you guys.